I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume. So I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. So we've been reading in the Gospels now. We did have a little bit of reading in 3rd Nephi with the collapse of the Nephite government happening about the same time as Christ is baptized. Christ had been tempted in the desert, in the wilderness. He has collected followers. His disciples have traveled with him to Galilee, and we had the wedding in Cana. In this video, we have a Joseph Smith translation. Now, what the Joseph Smith translation is, this is a translation or correction done by Joseph Smith to restore those passages that have been lost or corrupted over the years. So we are going to continue in John chapter 2, pick it up in verse 13, and we will finish out the chapter. And the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves and changers of money sitting. And when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overthrew the tables, and said unto them that sold doves, Take these things hence, make not my Father's house an house of merchandise. And his disciples remembered that it was written, The zeal of thine house shall eat me up. So this is the first time that Christ cleanses the temple, tossing all the stuff over, knocking over tables, driving all the animals out. Now, the issue here wasn't exactly that they were selling the animals. These are the guys that all the Jews would come for the Passover, and according to the law of Moses, the Passover lamb and the various sacrifices that need to be done, you would come, and you didn't want to bring animals with you, so you'd bring money, and you'd buy animals when you got there, so that you could hold the Passover. And that's what these guys were doing. They were selling the animals for the various sacrifices. The problem was that they were doing it in the temple. If they did it outside the temple, Christ would have had no issue with it. I don't think he would have cared. But they were doing it in the temple. They were desecrating the temple. That was the problem. Now, this quote in 17, The zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. I'm not sure what that's quoting. It says this was written down. This was a prophecy of Christ. Now, when this happens, his disciples recall the prophecy, but in the footnotes, we're not told where it's from. We're not giving a cross-reference, so I don't know where it's from. Maybe I'll look it up, but I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of writing from the Old Testament times that we no longer have. So there's a good chance that it's just from something that we don't have anymore. But let us continue. Verse 18. Then answered the Jews and said unto him, What sign shewest thou unto us, seeing that thou doest these things? Jesus answered and said unto them, Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then said the Jews, 46 years was this temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? But he spake of the temple of his body. When therefore he was risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this unto them, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. This is, as it says here, this is a prophecy of his resurrection. And John he's writing to members of the church, and he's saying, look, he said this way back at the beginning, at the very beginning of his ministry, shortly after his baptism. When we witnessed his resurrection, we remembered it. This is him addressing his audience. This is him addressing the saints, both then and now. Let's finish this out. Verse 23. Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover, in the feast day, many believed in his name when they saw the miracles which he did. But Jesus did not commit himself unto them, because he knew all men, and needed not that any should testify of him, for he knew what was in man. So Christ is there for the Passover. This is the feast day. I'm pretty sure that's the last day of the Passover. He's performing these miracles. It doesn't describe the miracles, but he performs miracles here. And there are many people who believe in him because of the miracles. But when it says he did not commit himself unto them, because he knew what was in man, he's saying Christ knew the weaknesses of men. And he knew that these people believed because of the miracles, because of what they had seen, but their faith was not strong. Their faith was not in the gospel. It was in the miracles. And so he did not commit himself, or as it says in the footnotes, he did not entrust himself to them. He didn't stay in Jerusalem because he knew that he still wouldn't be safe there. Now, let us look at the Joseph Smith translation. Again, it's mainly grammatical corrections. Instead of those that sold oxen, it's those who sold oxen. And changers of money instead of and the changers of money. Verse 16 said unto them that sold. Joseph Smith changes it, said unto them who sold. So we have a lot of these just grammatical changes. So then answered the Jews, in verse 18 have changed to then spake the Jews. Simple things like this. Now in verse 22 we have this interesting change though. Very minor but interesting. Where it says near the end of verse 22, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said. So then we have this alteration, this correction. And they remembered the scripture and the word which Jesus had said unto them. So this prophecy of Christ apparently had passed out of their minds, and when he was resurrected, they remember. And they remember that he was going to die and be resurrected. That's an interesting change. But then we have this last one here in verse 24 where it says, because he knew all men. Joseph Smith changes this, because he knew all things. So at this point, Christ already knows all things. He has learned and progressed in his progression to know. He knows all things now. We're going to leave that here. There's not much in the way of Joseph Smith's translation for this portion, and we're going to continue in John for a little while, so I will see you there.